Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 2nd of November. And joining me in the studio tonight is Sam Paton. Welcome back to the programme, Sam. Sam's famous for being one of the leading lights in the Save Loch Lomond campaign.
I wouldn't say famous, Gordon, but thank you very much for having me back in the show.
Okay, Sam, welcome back. And also sitting in for us this evening is Daye Tucker, Rural Leader. Welcome back to you as well, Daye.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Happy to be back.
Okay, well, we're going to get on with the show, as usual, first of all, with the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 998,388 people in Scotland have now been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Now, of these, 932,376 were confirmed negative. 66,012 were positive. There are now 951 new confirmed cases of COVID-19, but there were 0 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases. Not everyone with the virus displays symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. But of the people who have been tested, 1,225 were in hospital last night, 93 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus COVID-19 infections now stands at 2,849. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 46,717 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 162 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation here this evening, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. Now to this evening's main stories. The backlash is growing as Scotland has been denied furlough support. The SNP has demanded an immediate U-turn on the Tory government's decision to deny Scotland access to full furlough support outside of English lockdown periods. Ian Blackford MP said the outrageous decision demonstrates that Scotland will never be treated as an equal partner in the UK. And he called for an urgent U-turn and a guarantee that Scotland will now receive full access to furlough at 80% at any point required. The SNP Westminster leader said that the Tory government has deliberately hindered Scotland's response to the coronavirus crisis by withholding support and blocking the devolution of financial powers. And he said the only way to properly protect Scotland's interests is to become an independent country. It comes as the Scottish Trades Union Congress, the STUC, join calls for a Tory U-turn, warning, "We are deeply concerned at reports that the UK government continues to oppose making full furlough available at 80% for Scotland at any point that it is needed. If true, it would mark a new low point in the government's treatment of Scottish workers and public health in Scotland." In commenting, the SNP's Westminster leader Ian Blackford MP said the Tory government's decision to deny Scotland access to full furlough outside of English lockdown periods is outrageous, and it demonstrates that Scotland will never be treated as an equal partner in the UK. The SNP has been calling for a furlough extension and the devolution of financial powers for more than 6 months, but the Tories have refused to listen and have failed to act. When Scotland needed furlough support, Westminster said no. It is a democratic disgrace that Westminster only acted when England needed support, leaving Scotland high and dry. Scottish Green co-leader Patrick Harvey, MSP, said, "Public health policy in Scotland must be driven by what is happening in Scotland and not as what is happening in the south of England. It's been clear for some time that the UK government has nothing to offer Scotland but contempt. But the Prime Minister's actions over the weekend took this contempt to new levels, showing that he couldn't care less about workers and businesses here." Let me come to you first of all, Daye, on this topic. Now, we've been watching the developments throughout the day today, and Scotland seems to have been completely ignored yet again, and we're forced, it seems at least, to wait for England to move first before we're allowed to do anything.
Well, yes, rather strangely, because normally we're ahead of the game, and they're not very happy about that. But I think it reached a really new low we're used to Westminster saying no, just like the computer says no. Westminster is now famous for saying no. But the real low that they reached today was Douglas Ross stood up. And after two SNP MPs had actually asked the question of the Prime Minister, he only answered Douglas Ross. So he was, in effect, giving him or lifting him onto a sort of false platform that might give us the impression that Douglas Ross has any influence with the Prime Minister and the Westminster government.
Okay, well, an interesting observation, Daye. Sam, what about you? Do you agree with Daye that this has been handled as a political issue rather than a public health emergency and a financial emergency?
Yeah, I do agree with you on that, because they are using it to score political points every step of the way. And at the end of the day, as Patrick Harvey had says that Scotland's been treated with contempt by the UK government. And I mean, I seen part of it today when Ian Blackford had asked Boris Johnson once again about the furlough. And and it was Boris Johnson's body language, the language he used, once again, the Scottish Nationalist Party, once again. It's just complete and utter contempt. And at the end of the day, he did not acknowledge that Scotland has been taking a slightly different path to England in dealing with the pandemic, as has Wales and Northern Ireland. But it seems to be that the other countries are being punished if they're not towing into line with England, and as it's putting all the other countries in a very difficult position at the moment, because the furlough is only going to run until the 2nd December. It's putting all the governments in very difficult positions, because at the end of the day, we might not need to go into full lockdown now, but we might need to go into full lockdown come December. And if there's going to be no support there for people, it's a terrifying thought. It's an absolute terrifying thought. But no, I agree completely with Daye Gordon. It's a political move. It's not a public health matter.
Yeah. Well, I can confirm we just had a press statement issued by Ian Blackford, actually. Just got a copy of it here. And Mr. Blackford is actually to write to the Prime Minister following the Commons confusion. And in his letter, Mr. Blackford says the Prime Minister must give a cast iron written confirmation of the commitment he made in the House of Commons today, that the Treasury will make full 80% furlough payments available to Scotland whenever it is requested by the Scottish Government over the coming months, and not just in the period when England is in lockdown. So obviously Mr. Blackford is very concerned that he's not convinced by the answer given by Mr. Johnston in the House today. And as David Tucker was just saying, Sam, that it appears that Boris Johnson would only answer the only Conservative Scottish spokesperson in the House, it seems today. It seems ridiculous that he wouldn't even answer an SNP question from an SNP member. Surely that's just rudeness.
It is, and again, it goes back to the fact that the show Scotland complete and utter contempt. But yeah, I don't blame Ian Blackford for asking it in written confirmation, because we all know that Boris Johnson has a habit of being very what's the word? I can't use the word lie, so I'll use the word a bit economic with the truth when it comes to things that he says, and so. But I think even asking for it in writing is not going to make much difference whatsoever. The man's not exactly kind of well known for his honesty.
Okay, Daye, if I could ask you just to flesh out some of your thoughts about this. I got the impression today from listening, first of all, to what Mr. Sunak had said, about the furlough only being available to Scotland during the time of the English lockdown. This was almost as though they were testing us in some way to see if we would accept this. Do you think there's any truth in that they were trying this out just to see how far they could push it?
Well, possibly. I'm actually reminded of the time, I don't know if you can remember, when Theresa May was the Prime Minister, and we were trying to get some sort of clarity over migrant workers and how long they would be allowed to stay, apropos of the fruit picking up in Aberdeenshire and the north of Scotland. And she made a great play of not answering the SNP, but pulling out her own Conservative MP, and then claiming that they were the ones that had organised the, how can I put it, that they would work to try and help them and find a solution. They actually didn't find a solution because they still only offered 4,000 migrant worker places over the whole of the UK. It wouldn't even cover one of our nations. It certainly wouldn't cover the requirements of Scotland's migrant workers. But it's this playing with trying to make our impotent Tory MPs look more important than they actually are and appear to have influence when we know that they don't.
Daye, somebody was suggesting today on social media that Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson would not give Scotland the furlough as they asked for it until Douglas Ross asked for that, so that they could build Big Ross up, make him look like he was an effective spokesperson for the Scottish people. Do you think there's any truth in that?
I think it's absolutely the case. It doesn't work on the Scottish people because we know what the game is, but it possibly works on people down in England who are unaware of the goings on and the lack of goings on from the MPs fighting for Scotland up here. The Tory MPs up here have done nothing to support the needs of Scotland, but the press and the Prime Ministers, both of them, Theresa May and Boris Johnson, have bigged up these MPs, and it's all just a game to them. People's livelihoods are at stake.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, thank you for that. I'd like to, if I can, move on now. And this is a remarkable development, I think, in politics today. Police may be asked to stop English residents from escaping to Wales to avoid lockdown. Police may have to take action to stop residents of England escaping to Wales for an evening in a pub or a restaurant when the month-long English lockdown comes into force, the Welsh Government has said. The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, said that police forces on both sides of the border would have a role to play to make sure that English residents do not illegally cross the border when the Welsh hospitality industry reopens next week, after Wales's 17-day firebreak lockdown ends. Drakeford said that while Welsh residents will be able to travel around the country once the firebreak finishes, they will not be able to cross the border to England or travel abroad without good reason. English residents will not be able to travel to Wales apart from essential purposes. Asked if that was the hardest border that it had ever been, the First Minister said that may well be the case for several centuries at least. Drakeford's government was taken by surprise by the UK government's decision to impose an English lockdown, learning of the plans not from Westminster, but from leaks to the British newspapers. Sam, let me come to you first for your reaction to this. The Welsh police and the English police are having to patrol the Welsh border, presumably to stop English drinkers from crossing the border to get a pint. This is absolutely incredible, surely.
It is, isn't it, Gordon? When you were reading that, maybe asked to stop English people from escaping, it just makes me think of the film Hot Fuzz. Do you know what I mean? It's just absolutely. But however, there is a more serious note to this, obviously, and it's ridiculous at the end of the day that people, the police have got to be used this way. because at the end of the day, with a lot of cutbacks and things, the police are already overstretched, without having to police the borders and and run around. And, sorry, I just can't get my head out, the picture in my head of the police running about the borders, chasing people, trying to kind of keep them from crossing the border. So anyway, yeah, but there's got to be, there is a serious side to it, and at the end of the day, people got to take a bit of responsibility for their own actions, and and it's a bit of common sense. If one part of the United Kingdom's in lockdown, then obviously you kind of stay away from there and don't go travelling, even if it's just for a pint. But again, the whole story shows the contempt that the UK government have got for the devolved governments, where they found out through influence on, as probably everybody else did. They're not consulting with the devolved government, which is appalling.
Okay, Sam, thank you. Daye, I was going to ask you, compared to Wales, Scotland's border actually, I think it's a little bit shorter, but do you think there's a chance that the same thing could happen along the Scottish border, Daye? Is it possible that the Scottish police might have to see off an invasion from south of the border as well?
I do hope so.
You do?
Because it's been a long time in coming. The Welsh police know what to do. They've been active before in turning English tourists back during the other recent one. And there were lots of questions asked up here as to why our police can't do similar at our border, which would be much easier to manage, I would have thought. But we've seen videos of the Welsh police turning resident holidaymakers back. And one gentleman in a car saying, "But Wales is part of England." Now, this is the sort of ignorance that we're dealing with, and that the Welsh police and indeed the English police are dealing with. People have no clue.
So you think that the Welsh police are fighting against a sort of ignorance about the history of Wales and England, that Wales is actually a separate country from England and not part of a sort of greater England, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And let's face it, look what Edward II did. He sent his men in to conquer Wales. It was fine and handy because they were right there. Fortunately for Scotland, we were a bit further away and were able to fight him off. But Edward sent his men in, and then he raped all the women, and then the children were brought up as English, and the language was flattened, the culture was flattened. Wales has a far harder climb to get its respect and its independence back than we do in Scotland.
Well, the histories are similar, but you're right, Wales certainly had a much tougher time of it. I'd like to move on, actually, from this to another. I think this is connected in a way. It's connected to defence. Let me explain. The UK government is to retake control of nuclear weapons contracts from a consortium. The UK government announced today that it would retake control of the operation of the country's nuclear deterrent from a private consortium comprising of Lockheed Martin, Serco and Jacobs Engineering. The change in model will remove the current commercial arrangements, enhancing the Ministry of Defence's agility in the future management of the UK's nuclear deterrent, whilst also delivering on core Ministry of Defence objectives and value for money to the taxpayer, the government said. Now, this is a short story, but I think this is remarkable in some ways because, for one thing, I don't know about you, Sam, but I actually hadn't realised that our nuclear deterrent was being effectively run by private companies. Surely this is very unusual. Surely the Ministry of Defence should always have been in charge of them.
Yeah, it's something that serious, you would imagine that would be very much in control of what was going on. And yeah, I find it quite scary to think that private companies have been in charge of our nuclear arsenal. But Yeah, the UK government taking back control, it doesn't fill me with hope either. I don't know what's more scarier.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, however, you know, we'll know what's happening with Circle, with everything else, so it kind
Yeah.
of makes me wonder what's been going on there and why Circle had that contract and that control. So yeah,
Well,
there's a lot of
they are one of the favourite companies of the Conservative Party, and my understanding is that Serco may be a Tory donor. That's something I can't back up at the moment. I believe that might be true.
Yeah, well, we would need to find out if that's true or not. But yeah, it wouldn't. Wonders never cease, do they really? But yeah, Circle are certainly one of the Tory favourites. But yeah, I think there needs to be an inquiry into that one, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, I was going to ask you, Daye. This is a question of who owns Britain's nuclear deterrent. Now you'll notice that the name Lockheed Martin is on that consortium. Now Lockheed Martin, for those of our viewers who don't know, are an American multinational arms company who actually designed and built the Trident system themselves. But did it surprise you to learn, Daye, that the nuclear deterrent was being looked after by an American firm?
No, because I've always understood that really we just happen to house the stuff here in Britain. But what did surprise me was that it was more than Lockheed Martin, and the biggest surprise of all, Serco.
Yeah.
Serco? Was that not the company who housed the migrants in Glasgow?
Indeed it is, yeah.
I mean, what is going on?
Well, do you think perhaps, Daye, it's just about making money for Tory donors?
Well, certainly. I mean, we know that is happening. So yes, probably.
Do you think, given the fact that Serco has such a questionable record of dealing with public contracts, would you feel confident in a company like Serco being in charge of the security of your nuclear deterrent?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. However, I think it's Julian Wong, or there's an organisation who are challenging the government on this, and they're taking it to court. The fact that these contracts are being given out without any scrutiny at all. So I think that's going through the courts just now. So it could be that all of this will get exposed.
Well, it's my understanding, Daye, is that the British government has also given permission for, and this is unconnected at the moment to this subject, but they've given permission for Lockheed Martin to set up a rocket launching centre in the Scottish Highlands as well. And I don't know if this is connected in any way, but they certainly seem to be very closely connected to Lockheed Martin in a lot of different ways at the moment. Would that worry you, Daye, to know that they've got other connections apart from the obvious one here with the nuclear deterrent?
Yes, it would, because are we not doing something similar ourselves?
We are indeed, yes. There is a Scottish space launch company located in Edinburgh at the moment developing its own launch vehicle. Yeah.
It would be in competition to that.
Indeed, it would, Daye, yes. In fact, the fact that we have an Indigenous space programme is something which most Scots are unaware of. We have one of the biggest satellite manufacturers in the world with Clyde Space. So we have a space programme. It's just a case of do we want Lockheed to be muscling us out?
No.
Anyway, I think we shall move on. Battlegrounds seem to be the theme for this programme this evening, and we're now moving the focus to the battleground states of the United States of America on the last day of campaigning. The early voter turnout set a record, and the United States business districts are boarding up for fear of Election Day unrest. President Donald Trump and his rival Joe Biden stumped on the campaign's last day, and states expected to decide who wins. Trailing Biden in national opinion polls, Trump seeks to avoid becoming the first incumbent president to lose re-election since fellow Republican George H.W. Bush in 1992. The race in swing states seems as is seen as close enough that Trump could still piece together the 270 votes needed to prevail in the state-by-state electoral college, which determines the winner. Trump will hold 5 rallies on Monday in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. He won those states in 2016 against the Democrat Hillary Clinton, but polls show that Biden threatens to recapture all 4 for the Democrats. Biden will focus on Pennsylvania and Ohio. Sam, I don't know about you, but I always struggle to see the significance of the American presidential elections to our lives over here in Scotland. But what do you think? Is it going to be a repeat? Do you think there's a chance that Donald Trump might confound the polls yet again?
Oh, let's hope not, but however, I never expected him to get in to start with. Yeah, it doesn't really, it may not affect us directly, but it does affect us indirectly. There is a kind of butterfly effect of American politics coming over here into Scotland. What I found quite surprising, especially today, seeing reports coming in about the American election, is the fact that there's some places, some areas boarding up their windows and things, because people are worried about how people are going to react when the election, when the election's over and the result is announced, which I find quite disturbing. And the other thing I find quite disturbing about the whole situation is the fact that Trump's already kind of putting the groundwork out there for conspiracy theories, for things being rigged and all that as well. So
Yeah.
there seems to it's not. I don't think there's, whatever the result, I don't think there's going to be a happy ending in terms of celebration in the street and things. So I have been watching it, but it's been more about how people have been reacting as the results get closer, and that's quite disturbing. It's actually in itself quite disturbing.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you, Sam. Daye, I've been listening to and watching some of the interviews of particularly Trump supporters in this presidential election. And one of the most worrying things somebody said in an interview today, a woman said that she thought that Trump would win, but that if he didn't, she claimed that the big soldiers would come out, that there was some secret plan that Mr. Trump had to contest if he lost. And I mean, what do you think? What happens when a narcissistic president loses an election? Can he, do you think, bring people out onto the streets in the way this woman was expecting?
Yes, I think he probably can. And it's going to be a test of America as a country. Whether they can regain the respect that they used to have will depend on how they cope with that sort of scenario.
So do you think that Mr. Trump, if he loses, is definitely going to take the Electoral Commission in America to court, or is he going to just demand a recount? I mean, there have been very close elections in the past. I think the most notable one that I can remember was, I think it was George W. Bush when he was elected. I think it was a close run thing as well. And the American voting system is even more complicated and arcane than our own. But America does seem to be very much split into the populists and the traditionalists. And I mean, Joe Biden, with the best will in the world, isn't exactly the most exciting candidate. Can he snatch it from Trump, though? Can he do enough, do you think?
Yes, I think he can. And I have read somewhere that there's the possibility that he won't stay very long as president, and he will move. I've forgotten the name of the lady who's his running partner, but he'll move her in. Now, she is from an ethnic minority. She's a female,
Yeah.
and Americans, by their nature, are not going to move move her into the front position initially. But they probably would accept her in a situation where Joe Biden retired or
Yeah.
fell ill or whatever.
So you think that Joe Biden is going to become president for a while and then install his, what shall we say, his protege or his replacement to actually carry out the duties of president? It seems...
Well, it's
Sorry,
just a
Daye.
thought.
Say,
It's just a thought that's out there that I've seen
Yeah.
on Twitter.
do you think he's planning to be a one-term president and then hop it and put in his protege after that up for
Well,
election?
I do hope so, because I'm really tired of all these old men.
Yeah.
And those, come on, we've got all these bright young things out there just desperate to do something. And they've got so much talent and enthusiasm and energy. And yet we've got these old people. It's just, why any country would want to rely on that sort of age bracket, I do not know.
Okay, Dave. Well, listen, thank you both for your comments. We're going to move to Belarus now, and still staying with the kind of combative theme of this evening's news. The European Union is to target Lukashenko in the widening sanctions against Belarus. The European Union is expected to approve sanctions this week against a second list of Belarus officials over an August the 9th election, which the West says was rigged, including President Alexander Lukashenko, EU diplomats have said today. Lukashenko, who has been in power for 26 years, was not on the EU's original list of 40 individuals targeted for travel bans and asset freezes. But the EU says that his refusal to consider new elections as a way out of the crisis has left it with no choice. EU ambassadors will be given a second sanctions list of 15 officials, including Lukashenko, at a meeting on Wednesday. And barring any objections by any member states at the close of business on Friday, the plan will be adopted. The sanctions aim to support mass anti-government protests in Minsk, where thousands of demonstrators have been arrested. Daye, I'd like to come to you first on this story. Lukashenko has been clinging to power with all of his forces at the moment. And the European Union, I think initially many of us were surprised when they didn't target Lukashenko straight away. Do you think there was some reason why they held back and introduced sanctions for some of his other senior officials first?
Yes, apparently it was because Cyprus had demanded that the same action should be taken against Turkey. So they've maybe persuaded Turkey just to cool it, or Cyprus just to cool it, and let's get Lukashenko first.
So do you think that this was a veto in effect by Turkey to basically get what they wanted?
It was a veto by Cyprus.
Oh, Cyprus, I beg your pardon, Daye. I beg your pardon.
But I mean, it was as far back as the 2nd of October that he introduced the first sort of sanctions against 40 people, which didn't include Lukashenko. And Titania, the lady in the opposition, that brave young woman who's the opposition, she has been calling for the EU
Kalinskaya, I think her name's.
Yes.
Yeah.
To show a bit of bottle and stand up against him.
Okay. Sam, I know this is a long way away from Scotland, but Lukashenko seems to be doing what most despots do when he's faced with losing power, and that's to start using force. We're not hearing as much in the way of news or seeing so much on television about this, but my understanding is that thousands of people are still taking to the streets in Minsk as we speak. Do you think the people's sort of revolution has a chance of succeeding?
Hopefully, Gordon, I would like to see it succeeding, because Lukashenko, if I can get that right, I can never forget his name right, is, he is he's just a typical narcissist, really. He's grasping on by, the skin of his teeth, and he it was about time the EU stepped in. They should have done that a long time ago. And hopefully it'll have some resolve, a peaceful resolve. But isn't it interesting that we're not actually seeing a lot of it in our news here? it's only if you're on social media and you know where to look that you can find the stories of what's going on in Minsk at the moment. But yes, definitely solidarity to all the ones over in Minsk trying to overthrow Lukashenko. I think I got that right.
Well done,
yeah,
Jane. Well done. Okay, well, listen, thank you, Sam and Dave, for your comments. We're going to move on now. And moving back home now, apparently, and children and young people's mental health. Funding of £15 million is being made available to respond to children and young people's mental health issues, with a focus on those brought about by the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. The funding will be distributed to local authorities to support a local response for 5 to 24-year-olds, their families and their carers. And of this, £11.25 million will be for services in response to the pandemic, such as support for children who are struggling emotionally due to returning to school under the new restrictions. The remaining £3.75 million will be the first instalment of an annual £15 million fund to provide new and enhanced community mental health and wellbeing services. These new services will have a focus on prevention, early intervention and the treatment of distress. Now, it's often overlooked, I think. I think children in this pandemic have been overlooked rather a lot in this case. Daye, do you think that this goes far enough? Do you think this is a subject which has been ignored for too long?
Probably, yes. But I don't think that it's just children who are ignored. I think mental health is something that has risen up the political agenda in the last few years, and it is important. But do you know there's one organisation which could contribute something positive to people's mental health, and that is, wait for it, the BBC.
The BBC.
They are so negative. The stuff that is pumped out to us constantly is so depressing and so negative that I think they're one of the biggest contributors to people's mental health.
That's an interesting observation, Daye. Anecdotally, I think I would tend to agree with you. I do hear a lot from people saying, I can't face watching the news anymore. I'm not so sure about children, though, whether they suffer from it the same way. But I think certainly young people at university who are having to study at home and are missing this enormous chunk of their social development must be feeling pretty unhappy at the moment.
Well, yes, I'm sure they are. But you say that with the children, you're not sure whether they suffer in the same way. Has anyone ever thought to ask the young ones?
That's a very, very good point, I think. Sam, if I can kick this over to you. Children, they don't seem to be involved in the decision making, do they, most of the time? Do you think that should change?
Well, first of all, the thing is with kids and young people's mental health services over the last few years have been majorly suffering. And even before COVID, there was very much a case of, unless children were at the stage of self-harming or actually attempting suicide, there is no services there for children in mental health, and which is quite concerning. And the thing is with kids, they display mental health, especially young children, their display of mental health slightly different from adults. It comes out, I mean, they can't explain what's going on in their heads. So it's generally, it's like bad, what we would call bad behaviour and things like that, and it's getting to the root of the problem. With COVID coming along and everything that's happened in the lockdowns, that's added to that, because they are needing more support. But the thing is with parents, if any parents or grandparents or carers around there is worried about their kids or young people, teenagers as well, under 24, there is a lot of good information out there. There is a lot of things that you can do yourself. There is breathing exercises, there's meditation, there's what's called tapping. There's lots of different things that helps to combat anxiety issues with children and young people, and it's worth definitely having a look at. Because at the moment,
Sam,
even though the money's going to take a while for it to filter through.
Sam, sorry to interrupt you, just for a moment. I was just rereading the last line in this story, and you highlighted exactly what the focus is. The line says that these new services will have a focus on prevention, early intervention, and the treatment of distress. Do you think this is the difference between what's being proposed now and what has gone before it? Is it this new element of trying to prevent children from getting distressed?
Yes, because the thing is up until modern times, so to speak, we didn't recognise mental health in children. And the thing is, if mental health starts showing in children, that carries on into adult life, and that puts a strain on the adult mental health services. Whereas if we can deal with it as a preventative measure when they're children, it helps to ease off the services and ease things off in adult life. But there is things out there that parents can do themselves. There is as I say, meditation, tapping, breathing exercises, and lots of other different techniques as well, which helps kids. And also as well, one of the fundamental things, going back to basics, kids thrive with routine. So sticking to a routine, kids thrive in that because it makes them feel safe and secure. So sticking to routine as well, and basically just constant reassurance, and just, but at the same time encouraging them to be independent, encouraging them to go out there and not to be terrified of the world, and even though COVID's there, and it's just, it's hard with children, it can be difficult, and it's hard to see when you're watching kids experiencing distress, anxiety issues at young ages. But there is hope out there, and this hopefully will help with that. But as I said, and I keep saying, there is lots of things parents can do themselves, or carers can do themselves. Usually full of amazing tips for helping kids get through anxiety.
Okay, listen, thank you very much, Sam. It sounds like you're just the kind of person to actually get involved in that programme. And now, moving on, and this time the subject is combating biodiversity loss. Plans to commission a Scottish Centre of Expertise in Biodiversity have been announced as part of a new draft strategy for the environment, natural resources and agricultural research programme. The centre will bring together experts who will advise policymakers in government, local authorities and public bodies in how best to combat biodiversity loss. The centre will be established during the course of the next research programme, which begins in 2022. As well as a new focus on biodiversity, the draft strategy sets out plans for funding research on topics not previously included in the research programme. These include air quality and the circular economy. The research programme currently receives £48 million of Scottish Government investment annually. It supports nearly 1,500 jobs directly and indirectly across Scotland. It also enabled research institutes to leverage £28 million in additional funding from other UK and international funders in 2018-19. A public consultation on the strategy is now open, seeking views on future research priorities and delivery mechanisms. And now this is a subject, I guess, which would be right up your street, Daye. The idea of a biodiversity centre which looks at ways to combat the loss of biodiversity. In your opinion, Daye, as a rural leader and as a farmer, is this something that you would welcome?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, we do have lots of centres of excellence in terms of biodiversity as it is, but to have it centrally, where people could hive off each other and learn different ideas and ways, where you maybe have bug life there and butterfly here, and the farmers in another bit next to them, and they're all sharing things. Because one of the things I found when I was on various stakeholder groups, particularly the Perth and Argyll Regional Forestry Forum, which I love, by the way,
Uh-huh.
and we had all these different stakeholders around the table, and what we all learned from each other was really quite staggering. And then you begin to understand why things aren't happening, because everybody's working in a silo. So we need to integrate much more. I know that Forestry Commission and SNH and CEPA, they're all kind of integrating now, but that's only just recently happened. But the more we integrate and bring these pockets of excellence together, the better outcomes I think we'll have in terms of persuading policymakers to set up measures that farmers and the public can accept and put forward in terms of biodiversity, which is climate change.
Well, thank you very much for a very fulsome comment, Daye. Sam, you must have an interest in this. I know because of your campaigning activism in the environment, particularly with respect to your campaign for saving Loch Lomond, you must have an interest in this. How important is it, though, to preserve the biodiversity of Scotland? Why does it benefit human beings?
Oh, of course it benefits us. We were just talking about mental health there, just before. There's so many aspects, and also jobs as well in communities, the economic side of the environment. There's ecotourism. There's so many different things in biodiversity. You could kind of clump together. It's such a big umbrella. Yeah, it's great and it's fantastic. It's great to get everybody together, everybody bouncing off each other, ideas and things like that. But my only concern, and I do have a concern, is how much consultation is there going to be with the local communities, and taking in their concerns, because at the moment, regards to the national park, it is not very open, it's not very democratic, it's not very good at listening to local community concern. So it needs to be able to listen to local concerns and take these into consideration, rather than just kind of fobbing the locals off as not quite knowing what they're talking about. So and yes, I think it's a fantastic, and I think it's great, and definitely should be welcomed. But it needs to make sure that there's going to be plenty of local community consultation as well and input.
Sam, just one last question for you. There's a campaign running at the moment in the borders down near Kirkcudbright to prevent, I think it's 138 giant pylons being erected around the forest in the borders. How important is it for a kind of research organisation like this to advise government in these sorts of areas?
They are very important, because you need the expertise, because a lot of the times when it comes to planning and what's happening, they only see it from a two-dimensional point of view, and the thing is, it's not. There are so many factors, and it's not about us tree huggers protecting the trees. There's so much more to it. It's about, what kind of minerals are in the soil, what kind of gases are in the soil. When that soil is disturbed, what's going to happen with it. Also, it's about what protective species are around, as well. And also as well, the impact it's going to have on human health. If you're going to put a whole load of pylons up, what's the radius to housing, and how many people go walking there? Is there farms around about? All that kind of stuff. So all these things need to get taken into consideration, whereas up until the moment, planning is very two-dimensional, as in jobs and how much it's a kind of, what can I say?
It's too much focus on the commercial, Sam.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of thought given to the long-term prospects or short-term prospects, which is quite short-sighted, may I put. And the thing is, and especially with COVID at the moment, the planning process is not working the way it normally works because people are not able to access the same information. They are being cut off from a lot of the information, and they're not able, the consultations are
Yeah.
not taking place at the moment. So people, a lot of planning that's going on around different communities, a lot of locals are not even aware that planning is still ongoing. These things
Yeah.
are still ongoing. Because I know with the national park, I mean, that's all moved to online, and the general locals can't even, a lot of the times, can't even access that.
Yeah.
Whereas before they could go along to a public meeting. So there's a lot of things, but yeah, the centre would be quite important because hopefully it would make the planning process more three-dimensional and actually take, a
Yeah.
lot more into
Okay,
consideration rather
Sam, I'm sorry, I've got to have to cut you off there. We're running a bit low on time this evening. And to our next story now. The Langholm Initiative has succeeded in buying 5,000 acres of Langholm Moor for £3.8 million. The Langholm Initiative has succeeded in buying a large part of the Langholm Moor, a famous grouse moor held for centuries by the Dukes of Buccleuch, among the UK's most powerful hereditary peers. The Buccleuch estate said on Monday that it would be selling just over 2,000 hectares, about 5,000 acres of Langholm Moor, for £3.8 million to the local community, which plans to create a leading new nature reserve and community regeneration project. The deal, the largest ever community buyout in the south of Scotland, follows months of fundraising by the Langholm Initiative, which only succeeded with hours to spare before the deadline of the 31st of October. Responding to the announcement, Scottish Greens lead candidate for the south of Scotland, Laura Moody, said, "This is a welcome development for the whole of the south of Scotland and hopefully means barren grouse moors will now be put into more productive use, like small-scale renewables, creating a nature reserve and building good quality homes. It's disappointing, however, that the Duke of Buccleuch has held out for such a high price for the larger area. The process of community acquisition of land cannot simply be reliant on the public raising millions to be handed over to private hands. That's why the Scottish Greens want to strengthen the rights of community buyouts in the future." This is a terrific subject for you, Daye. The issue of land ownership in Scotland is basically a thorn in the flesh of Scotland to some degree. How do you greet this news today, Daye? Is it good news? Is it the start of something bigger?
I greet any community buyouts with great respect and applause for the people who put the time and effort into getting the buyout on its way and sorted. This particular moor, however, has been not in public ownership right now, but it has been handed over by the Duke of Buccleuch since 2008 under the other Lannan project. So that involved RSPB. Let me just have a wee look. It was a partnership between SNH, Game and Wildlife Conservation, RSPB, Natural England, and local people. So for years it was used as an experiment. But now that the community has brought it over, that's the sort of next step in the journey to perhaps.
So this is really just the beginning, yeah?
It's just the beginning, yes. So
yeah.
I do wish them luck, and I hope it all works out for them. It's a huge challenge, and certainly will have massive support. I think we also shouldn't forget that a lot of the Buccleuch lands are actually quite. They've done things like clear up the open cast coal mines into stuff like that. And because they're such a wealthy organisation, they have the funding to get that going and up and running.
Excellent.
Whereas the company left it behind for the community to clear up, and they can't afford to do that.
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much, Daye. Sam, if you would, briefly, what's your reaction to this news today that the Buccleuch Estates has finally sold this piece of land for what seems like quite a lot of money? Do you think the local community was gouged here by the Duke?
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. He's basically held out. He's not deliberate, hasn't he? It's disgusting. But however, well done to the local community for raising money and doing that. And 3.8 million. It just goes to show you what people can do when they're all clubbed together, and it's fantastic. And wish them all the best. I mean, I know with Lisa, um, we as we say Loch Lomond, we are not allowed to even bid for our land, even though it's publicly owned, but we are actually not allowed legally, and that's only valued at 200,000. So you think how quickly we could raise that money, and that's in current public ownership,
Yeah.
and you can't do that, and it's just ludicrous. When it comes to kind of land ownership and public assets and things, there needs to definitely be a change, and the communities need to be more involved again in what the agencies or the quangos are doing with our assets.
Okay, so it's a welcome change, Sam. Thank you. And on to our final story this evening. A whale sculpture has stopped a Dutch train from crashing into the water. A metro train that overran stop blocks at a station outside Rotterdam has been left balancing 10 metres above the ground on the plastic tail of a whale sculpture. The metro driver was reportedly able to free himself from the train without injury after the incident shortly after midnight on Monday morning. There were no passengers on board. Martin Struges, who made the sculpture of two tails emerging from the water beneath the elevated metro line, said that he was surprised the sculpture had held together. He said, "I would never have imagined it that way, but it saved the operator's life. The damage is an afterthought. I'm amazed that it's so strong. When plastic has stood for 20 years, you don't expect it to hold up a metro train." The artwork, saved by the whale's tail, was erected in 2002 by Daye station in, I'll need to take my time pronouncing this, Spijkenisse, on the outskirts of Rotterdam, in the Dutch province of South Holland. It's made of reinforced polyester. The emergency services were seeking to restore the scene on Monday. Given the complexity, this will take some time, a spokesman for the Rotterdam Rijnmond Safety Region said. It'll be quite an exercise to get that thing off and to get it safe. So I think here, Daye, this is a story of a whaleway station almost, isn't it?
I mean, you've got to take your hat off to these people over there in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
They are such good engineers.
They certainly are.
What they've done with their land and how they rescued the land from the sea and they're keeping it safe from the sea. The things that they do. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a plane taking off for home at Amsterdam.
Yes, I have actually.
The bit I love the best is watching another plane coming over the runway.
Yeah.
Over a built runway. It's not just motor cars, it's actual plane, a big passenger plane. And I just find the whole thing amazing, the way they're such good engineers.
Certainly is remarkable. Sam, what do you think? Saved by a whale's tail. I mean, it sounds like something out of Moby Dick. This, doesn't it?
It does. I agree with you. It's just absolutely amazing, and a testament to the artist. I mean, the last time I was in Rotterdam was, crikey, 2001, many moons ago, and it's an amazing place. Absolutely loved it.
Yeah. It's like the Dutch equivalent of the Kelpies, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's just an amazing place. But yeah, it's just a testament to the artists who made the sculpture, and it's just, it's one of those good news stories, isn't it? Brings a smile to your face.
Maybe they should rename the railway train Ahab or something like that. Anyway, that's about it for the programme this evening. But before I leave you, just to remind you that if you'd like to help Broadcasting Scotland by supporting us, you can do that by following the instructions on your screen now. But from all of us here, from my two guests tonight, from Sam Paton and from Daye Tucker and myself, a very good night to you.